I'm delighted to welcome this morning Dexter Moscow, who is the Picasso of sales presentations. So welcome, Dexter.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Lovely to be here with you.
So, Picasso of sales presentations, that's rather a grand title. Is that self-inflicted, or is that something that people say about you when you do presentations?
It's partly self-inflicted. Certainly the Dexter Moscow part is. I obviously had parents with a sense of humor. I now hesitate when somebody says, well, what is your name? Because of the connotation that Moscow has now. I'm a bit concerned about that. The Picasso presentations really came out of my QVC experience. Because, and I say this, presenting is an art form. It's not something that a lot of people feel comfortable with. So part of what I do is to help them feel comfortable and to present as an artist, because we need not to sell, but to influence and persuade. So that's where it's come from.
Wonderful, an art form. You mentioned, you slipped in there QVC. For listeners who don't know what QVC is, maybe the different generations might not get that. So tell us a bit about QVC and what your involvement was there.
Well, QVC is an international shopping channel, a very, very successful shopping channel, which sells everything from high quality computers to kitchen equipment of all kinds. And QVC came about, I think now, about 25 years ago. And it's virtually an online catalog where, as I say, they sell all manner of things. And a friend of mine said, would you like to sell some stuff for me on QVC? And then this shows how long ago it was. They were video recorders. Mm-hmm. And he knew that because of my property experience, I'd trained negotiators how to sell. And so he invited me to sell on this TV channel. And at that time, I didn't even know that it was a TV channel, and that more importantly, it went out live. And so my involvement was as what they call a guest presenter, working with the presenters to sell all manner of products. And then after a very short period of time with them, they recognized that I had some experience as a trainer. And so I became their chief trainer, helping people like myself who represented a brand or a product, or even if they had invented something or designed something. So they had no experience of selling in what I call the televisual age. And now we're very much in that. We're, with Zoom and all of those other facilities, we are ostensibly selling through a television screen, whether we're influencing, persuading, or just chatting to our clients. So that's how it came about many, many years ago.
So in effect, your time has now come round again.
It is true. During the pandemic and the lockdowns that we experienced, where the only way that we could communicate with clients and friends and colleagues was through this one-eyed monster that we now are used to. And so, yes, a lot of my time was spent during that period of time helping people present, tell their story, and just making connections and communicating more effectively.
Fabulous. So for anybody listening who isn't Zoom aware, what kind of first steps should they be taking to get themselves Zoom aware? Because I'm still hearing of people who haven't done networking online, which I'm completely surprised about, because I'm on here so often. But give us some advice, Dexter.
I think the first thing, and certainly it comes from my QVC experience, is to make sure that you can be seen properly. So that means lighting, and to be heard properly, which means a good microphone. Don't necessarily just depend upon what comes with the computer. I mean, as time goes by, it's much more sophisticated now. And certainly I'm speaking to you through a high definition camera. So if you're going to do it as you do, if you're doing podcasts, or if you really need to get the message across, then those are the three key elements. And then the next is really about telling stories. That's what QVC was all about. It wasn't necessary, okay, I have a laptop here, but it's what that laptop can do about communication, about reaching people that are on the other side of the world. So it is developing the stories, and that's where the art form comes in, is to tell the right story, tell it succinctly so that you engage with people and you create trust. So those are the key elements. Make sure your equipment's right and make sure you're telling the right stories.
Mm. And I'd add to that as well, to the right audience, because if you tell a really good story to the wrong audience, you're going to end up with egg on your face, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for saying that. You know, relevance is absolutely key. And I have a mantra which says, don't tell me what you do, tell me what you have done for others.
Mm.
So that when you create those stories about how you've helped people, then people can step into that experience. And the relevance comes by, as you just said, telling the right story to the right people.
So knowing our audience is key, isn't it? Which is something that I'm gradually changing or adding to with my podcast. So I've done hundreds of podcasts in the health and wellbeing sector, and I'm now adding people like yourselves in the bright mind section, which is about business. And I've found that so many health practitioners do wonderful things with their therapies and their hands and healing things that they do, but they haven't got a blinking clue about business. So I'm introducing more business related conversations so that they can share. We can all share together and learn from each other. So
Oh, I agree with that. And sorry to interrupt you. I think that at this time, and we alluded to it before we came online, that, you know, with all that's going on politically and globally politically, and in this country, and all the fear and concern that's being generated, sometimes ridiculously, health and well-being is certainly part of it. So if you can manage your product, your service, or what you're talking about that taps into both of those experiences, then that's what people need now. They need guidance, but they also need to feel good as well.
yeah, absolutely. And there's a thing, isn't there? Don't tell me what I can do for you. Tell me how I can make you feel, or something like that. I've misquoted it, but it's the feeling, isn't it? The
It
emotion.
is. It's absolutely, you know, that there is a golden rule, and it's a universal truth, is that people buy emotionally, they decide logically, and it is as important, in fact, it's more important to connect with people emotionally, which means really, as you've said before, really understanding who that individual is or who the audience is you're speaking to, so that then you can make that connection and help them, whether it be through a service that you're providing or, as I say, just to make them feel better.
Absolutely. So you've written two books, Stand Up and Sell, and A Voyage Without My Father. Which one of those would you like to tell us about first?
I'll talk about the Stand Up and Sell because we've been talking about QVC, the shopping channel. And certainly that came out of my experience with QVC. So it's very much storytelling. It's some of the fun that I had there, and I had a lot of fun there. I was their chief trainer for about 16 years. So working with the presenters on a concept which is called the dance, and I'm mentioning it here because this is what we are doing. We're talking to each other. You're asking questions, I'm answering. And so that was what QVC was about. It's the when people see the dance and they overhear that conversation, it's not like they're being sold to. So a lot of that stand up and sell, which I think I should now revise it and call sit down and Zoom.
Mm.
It is about that those stories, the experience that I had. Again, stories sell, and people want to know the experience. So that's what that's all about. There's some, I was going to say fruity kind of experiences there, which I won't go into now, but some of them are a bit near the knuckle, which is great fun. And then that gave me actually the courage to write the book here, A Voyage Without My Father, which is something that I wanted to write for years. And it certainly speaks to your expertise. It's about, I lost my dad when I was just 10, which had a great impact upon me as a child, But then I hit a crisis point in my 40s, which was the age at which my father had passed. He was only 45. And this experience of how the trauma that came out of that and the regret, I was not allowed to see my dad in hospital because kids were not allowed into hospital wards at that time. And so it's a situation that so many have experienced in this pandemic, not being allowed to say goodbye to their loved ones. And so I thought now is the time to talk about that regret and that experience and how it lives with us. Grief never goes away. We just manage it. And so a lot of that book, it's a memoir. Again, it's storytelling and a lot of it is great fun. But then there are dark times as well. And so in the book, I give processes and therapies that I found most helpful and have encapsulated in that book. And so that's part of my mission now. It's not only to sell my ideas, but to sell that experience so that people, I talk about it in the book, move from grief to growth to gratitude. Because regardless of the loss and how that loss is experienced, it could be through death, it could be through divorce or just abandonment. It's still grief. And so if I can help people move away from that feeling, acknowledging it without having to relive it, then that's certainly my mission.
And absolutely huge purpose in your life now, which many people go through their life never finding their purpose. And when a purpose comes out of some kind of adversity, I think that makes it more relevant, stronger, you're more passionate about it. And in my situation as well, my father also died young in his 40s, and I was just about 19. So I never really knew him as a grown-up. I never had an adult conversation with him. And through my adversities and so on, makes me passionate, or not makes me, it helps me to be passionate about, what I do and how I help people with their health and well-being, and recently been acknowledged with an award for it. So that's icing on the cake, really. So that's really good. So with your ups and downs, and you mentioned dark places and so on and so forth, maybe you could give us some tips on how you managed to get through that once you acknowledged that in your 40s you were having this, I suppose, what people would call a midlife crisis of some kind. How did you get yourself out? Because that's not terribly easy, particularly being a man as well. It's even harder.
Do you know, that's so true. I mean, that was, again, one of the reasons that prompted me to write the book, that we as men do not talk about things like that. And I say, being vulnerable is not a weakness, it's a strength. And so, the book talks about how this trauma came about. And I think a lot of people will resonate with this. There are certain times in our lives, and you certainly would have experienced it, where we get married, we have children, we may see our partners, and there is that little bit of regret which says, I wish my dad or wish my mother, whoever we have lost, was there to see it. When we have children, those very important parts in our life where we wish they had been there, just for us to say, look at that, isn't that great? And so what happened in my 40s was that I started to get very short-tempered with my kids. I have twin boys, and now they're twin men, my gray hair. And I found I got very short, and if they would cry, I would get very angry. And I realized, and Fran turned around to me and she said, this is not right. This is an overreaction. Go and find out what this is about. So I went into psychotherapy for about 18 months. And I do not denigrate these talking therapies, because for some people it's very effective. But at the end of that period, the main thing that came out of it was that I was angry at my father for dying. But what do you do with that? Where do you take that? How do you resolve that? So I looked for other therapies, and I joined various groups. One was to do with meditation, or visualization. Others were about communicating. And the most effective one for me was something called Gestalt therapy, which is having, and you're nodding your head, you understand it. It's where you have that conversation, and it works in terms if you're having a dispute with somebody. So from a business perspective, it works as well, so that you see the other person's point of view, and either physically or mentally, you sit in the other person's seat, and then you hear what they say. So what that meant for me is, and I call it MIC, M-I-C. I meditated or visualized that I was standing at my father's side when he was in the hospital. And through my imagination, I had this conversation. And I said to him, because of my therapy, I'm angry at you for dying, for leaving me in my most formative years. And in my imagination, this communication, so that's the MIC, meditation, imagination, and communication. I had this conversation with him. And I saw it from his perspective. And what he said to me was, there wasn't open heart surgery. There was no such thing as statins. And we were just sent to a hospital to die. There was nothing we could do. And I came out of that discussion, that conversation, that communication with a weight lifted from my shoulders. So if there's a message I want to give to your viewers and your listeners today, is though they have gone, you can still have that conversation. So go to a meditative level, and it's very easy. Just breathe, take 3 deep breaths, and imagine that's the imagination that you're in front of them or by the side of them, and then just talk.
Thank you for sharing that, Dexter. It's very interesting how we all deal with grief, betrayal, separation, whatever we call it, however it affects us. And you were angry. I haven't experienced the anger. I experienced the only time I think in recent years I've experienced anger was the nonsense with the pandemic thing at the beginning of all that, seeing through it for what it is. And the fear that has been instilled into people because they think it's real when it's the flu basically. But we won't go down that rabbit hole on this conversation. It's how you mentioned earlier on about we buy on emotion and then we justify by logic, and our emotions are the thing that drive us day to day. And how many times have we all done something intuitively and then gone, oh, shouldn't have done that, shouldn't have said that, whatever. So how do you kind of mesh together your experience as a trainer, a salesperson, now very knowledgeable about health and well-being? It's almost like you're doing yourself a disservice by talking about sales presentations, because you're a kind of a guru in life, aren't you?
Well, I've been around for a few years now, certainly. I think, that kind of negotiation about grief and about coming to terms with that. And one of the things, and I'll talk about it in a few moments, about seeing things that happen to us, not as tragic, obviously they are when we're going through them, but as a gift. And what gift and opportunity does that experience give us? And so I think the way that I mesh those two together is to say, because I've negotiated with my feelings, then I'm able to help people who perhaps are nervous about speaking in public, who feel less worthy, and therefore what right do they have to offer their service or their experience? So that kind of where those two elements cross over. But just prior to the pandemic, about a year prior to the pandemic, my son, who's in the States, said, "Dad, I think there's an extra element that you'll find interesting, and it's called positive intelligence." And it's based on neuroscientific research that each of us have certain saboteurs, and they're identified as 9 saboteurs that have impacted us through our lives. So one of them, which is my top saboteur, is a stickler, which means when I approach a topic or approach a subject, It's got to be 100% right. It's got to be perfect. And we know in life nothing is perfect. So the best that we can do is the best that we can do. So what positive intelligence does, it looks at those experiences in our lives. And if there are those saboteur voices in our heads, which say we're not good enough, or we're not effective, or what have we got to offer others, then it's a process to, through visualization again, is to quieten that voice, to recognize what we've achieved, and to recognize those situations in our lives which have impacted us negatively can be seen as a positive. So to give you an example, what was the positive in my father dying and leaving me when I was just 10? Hopefully it made me a better father. It helped me to be with my boys as much as I possibly could. So, you know, from that trauma, there is a positive, and that's how I mesh them together. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. And you and I, when we first met, we didn't know that we'd both been through the training of positive intelligence. So we both speak the same language. And the reason I did the training was because I wanted to find a way to explain to people about the positivity in life, because I'm often criticizing by those who aren't able to be as positive as I am. Well, how do you do it? And you can't always be positive, and la 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 la. And
absolutely,
particularly when
Elaine, I do apologize, but somebody has just rung my doorbell, so I'm just going to open the door, and I'll be with you. Just a sec.
So you've answered your door now. Jolly good. We don't edit any of this. We just put it out as it is. So now we're sitting comfortably again.
Yes,
so the reason I did it was because I'm often criticised by less positive people for they see it that I over egg things, and there is always a positive for me, always. And I remember my daughter telling me once upon a time, Mum, when you're speaking on the stage, when you're on the radio, when you're this, that, and the other thing, not everybody can be as positive as you are. And by what you're saying, you may, make people feel inadequate. And well, I'm sorry, I can't not be me. I am me. So I kept on hearing this again and again from other people as well. And I thought, well, there must be some way. How can I explain, I just am, I've had 4 cancers. I was told I'd be on a medication for life for a kidney condition I was born with. I beat that in my 40s. I've had 4 different cancers, including stage 4. And people, when I do, obviously I don't stand and bleat on about this, but I do mention it in passing. And their faces drop. Oh, you poor thing. No, they're gifts. All these things, as you said, they're gifts that come to us that we learn from. I didn't listen to the first cancer or the second cancer, and then I got stage 4 cancer, all different types. So they're all things happen to us, they're all gifts. And then when we go through those gifts, when we embrace them, we learn from them, we reflect, we then can make a difference in people's lives. And that's what you and I are both doing now in our different ways.
Oh, I so agree with that. And I think, people who say, why are you so positive? Why are you so happy, if that's the right expression? But what's the alternative? To be depressed and to never see a way out? And this is not a new concept. I mean, this goes back and it is part of positive intelligence, that it's based on the belief of the Stoics, the Greek philosophers, who said that the only thing that we have control over is our reaction to any given situation. And we can decide that it will hold us down, or we can decide, no, what, as you've just said, what is the lesson that we can learn to move forward from that? And I think that's a much better attitude. And I don't know why I'm promoting somebody else's book, but Derren Brown, the illusionist, has written a book called Happy, which is a brilliant look at the history of how people have moved forward from these negative emotions and done wonderful things. And I think anybody who has experienced the kind of things that we have, and I applaud you for being able to say, I've been there, I've done it, and I've come through, so I can help you. I think that's brilliant.
And it's also, it's like, I'm just looking on my phone because I've just, when you said Darren Brown, I've just finished a podcast recently. Oh, I'm offline. It's not going to give me what I need. I've just finished a podcast series from him. I can't remember what it's called, but it's about 10 different sessions. You know, they'd be individual documentary, shall we say, if they were on the TV, about the
Yes,
brain and how it works, and it's, you know, it's all, and it's absolutely fascinating. And so much of it is through storytelling, like you've been saying. So he
absolutely.
says all these stories, and then he mixes with that and that, you know, the neuroscience and so on and so forth. So we both
Yes,
trained in positive intelligence, without, you know, knowing one another. We met through a different forum,
yes.
and we both have similar kind of backstories in some ways. Um,
We do, you know, and I do believe in fate. I believe that, you know, things do happen for a reason and
yes,
people are brought together for a
yeah,
reason. So,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I in the 90s, the mid 90s, I had the fortune to be trained personally by Bob Proctor, who, for the listeners who don't know who Bob Proctor is a Canadian personal growth mentor expert, who recently died in his early 90s. Fascinating man, and I was trained by him, and I learnt about the stick person. So if you imagine we had The Saint, the TV program years ago. At the beginning of it, there was like this stick man with a halo, the Saint. So the stick person, if you imagine that the head, and there's a line across, so the circle is the head, and you have a line across the nose. The top of the head is the conscious mind. Below the nose is the subconscious mind. Then you have the body where the actions and the feelings and everything are. And then the arm that was kind of poking out is the pointing to the results. So if your thoughts, feeling, and actions are out of alignment with one another, then your results will be. So if your results are not what you want them to be, track back how you were feeling, what you were thinking, etc., etc. And all of this stuff, as you say, isn't new at all, but there's lots of different ways that we are brought to this information throughout our lives. And the positive intelligence piece, for the benefit of the listeners, if you go on to positiveintelligence.com, here am I, you know, promoting somebody else, but that's what we do in this world of collaboration. We all help each other. So
Yes.
positiveintelligence.com, there's a tab on the top that says saboteurs. And if you go onto that, you can do your saboteur assessment. Interestingly, you said, Dexter, that your biggest saboteur is stickler. Mine is overachiever. And I don't think that's a
Right.
coincidence either, given our backgrounds.
Isn't it interesting? Because my second one is that overachiever, hyperachiever. And
Yeah,
what, yeah, and people say, well, isn't it good to be a hyperachiever, to keep on pushing for the next?
not
And
always.
no, it's the way of depression, it's the way of burnout. And so we know, because we've gone through the positive intelligence course and assessments, that, you know, these things as we're growing are okay, but when they become overreacting or hyperreacting, then it does a disservice. It really does a disservice. And so if we can move away from those experiences, and we know it's not who we are, it's part of who we are.
Yes, yeah.
And our life teaches us that. So if we can just step back from those experiences and go, and you know the mantra, it's ease and flow. If we go with ease and flow, people will be amazed the difference when you take your foot off the pedal just for a little bit, the difference it makes, and still you move forward.
Absolutely. I had a friend stay with me recently, and she was amazed about how I live. I live on my own. I live in the Algarve in Portugal, and I don't see that many people unless I choose to. So I'm in control of my life, and I am an outgoing social bunny, but I'm also, you know, I like my own company. And she was amazed at, I didn't know she was arriving. It was unexpected circumstances that she came with me, with her cat. And she was just kind of watching me. She had, you know, trauma, which is why she came to stay. and she was just watching how I was kind of conducting myself, and I was just like sailing through my day. I had umpteen and one Zoom calls and appointments and whatever, and appointments in the town. And then she was she would just see me flow. She said, "How do you do it? You just, everything is just kind of easy. It just flows." And I've been criticised for that by other people as well, that I always seem to smell of roses regardless of what happens to me. And it's, the resilience piece. It's not how many times you're knocked down, it's how many times you get up, isn't it, that counts.
Oh, so true. And more power to you, because I think, when people question that and we say, well, just try it, just go with it. And what you were talking about resilience, I was speaking to a psychologist the other day, and he was saying, resilience is something that we learn. So I said, no, it isn't, because if that was the case, kids, babies would, when they stand up and fall over and they find that's painful, they wouldn't, if it wasn't for resilience, they wouldn't get up again and ultimately walk. And so I think, resilience is something that is part of us, but it does tend to get covered by life and the stretches and strains of life. So when somebody adopts your perspective that it's okay, everything will work out okay, and we can, again, that mantra, we only have control over what we do. So unfortunately, there is a war in the Ukraine, there is an economic pressure, and we can take a position, but we can't change it. We can only sympathize, but then continue to live our lives as we want to.
Absolutely. Taking responsibility for ourselves is so important. And the health and well-being piece has never been more important, because people have become lazy and relying upon pills and potions and going to the doctors. Now, I understand that in the UK, you can barely get a doctor appointment or a dentist appointment. The pharmacists are overloaded. But again, it's all by design and what have we. But people aren't taking their responsibility for themselves, and they're blaming the doctors because they can't get an appointment. That's why they're ill. No, just look at why you're ill. Look at what the symptoms are. You can fix yourself. Your body will heal itself if you give it the right environment. Go out there,
Yes.
learn. That's what I did. You learn how to fix yourself. But unfortunately, with overwhelm and society as it is, and people just, a lot of people have just run out of energy, and I do feel very sad for those. But we are here to help for those who are willing. And actually, I come with a health warning, because I say to people, don't come to me if you're not prepared to roll your sleeves up and put effort in, because I'm not going to do. I'm a health and well-being specialist these days, which I never dreamed in a million years I would morph into what I'm doing now. But that's the way things are. But I can't do it for you. You have to do it yourself. And the same with you with the sales things. You can train people, you can teach people, but unless they put the effort in, the repetition, the learning, they're not going to watch a video of you doing something, or listen to you or have a one-to-one session with you and then go, right, I'm an expert presenter. It's not going to work, is it?
No. I so agree with what you say, that if there is one message that we want to convey to people, is that take responsibility for your own well-being, for the way that you think, and do not listen to the media. There are times when I will just switch off and don't want to hear the news, because it's such a jaundiced view. And I think it was Michael Crichton who wrote a book called The State of Fear. And that's what the media does. It always looks on the blackest side. Even this current problem with the energy price and all of that situation. We're now being told that the actual energy price is coming down. So, all right, we're going to have to pay more, but ultimately it will be better. And so don't listen to the news. Make your own decisions about what you want and what your purpose. I so agree with that. When you identify your purpose, that is so releasing.
Yeah, very, very powerful. And it's well, I don't actually watch the television. I've gone a step further. I don't have a television. I don't own a television. I haven't done for some time. I did a master's degree in the 90s, mid-90s, and I had to find time from somewhere. And I added up the time I was spending listening to the news, watching the television, reading newspapers. So since 1995, I haven't bought a national newspaper or watched the television or the news and so on. I might see it, overlooking something if I'm somewhere else or if I'm in a venue where stuff's on, and it just reconfirms to me why I don't waste my time on this, because it's utter nonsense. And of course today there's so many other platforms where you can get real news rather than the manipulated nonsense that's out there. So
Absolutely. And I think, don't get persuaded by social networks and don't expect, all of the likes or the confirmations from that. Be true to yourself. And I do agree with you. I mean, I must admit, I like television. I watch television because I think there is, certainly in terms of presenting or engaging with people and getting the message out there. There's some really great programs out there where you can see how people do connect, and again it's that emotional connection. So I see it, it's sometimes very fascinating, but I agree with you in terms of the news and what we're fed by the various media outlets. It doesn't help us, it doesn't serve us.
I tend to listen to audiobooks these days, or I'm selective on finding things on the internet and documentaries and things where I'm going to learn. I don't. It's very, very unusual for me to watch something where I'm not learning. And even then, if it's not an educational thing, there's something that you can pick up, like you say, the interaction with people, or some little snippet. So always, every day is a school day, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I so agree. I've got a few years on me and I learn something new every day. And the way to learn is just to listen to people, to
Yeah.
connect with people, just to understand their life stories and what's happened to them and the lessons that we can learn from that as well. And sharing that's hopefully what we're doing. We're giving people the right to question, what was it for you? How did you get over that? And that's so helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And the purpose of why I do what I do with the podcasting. So thank you so much, Dexter, for your time today and a lovely, lovely chat. So how can people contact you?
Well, they can reach me by my email, which is dexter@dextermoscow.co.uk. Or they can give me a ring if they would like to. My number is 07973 635 670. And just let me know how you're getting on. I do have a newsletter which I put out, and it's called Persuasive Presentations. So yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to chat with you.
Marvelous. And give us your email again.
Say again.
Your email. What's your email again?
My email again is dexter@dextermoscow.co.uk.
And for the benefit of the audio listeners, it's Moscow as in Russia, Moscow.
As in Russia, and I kind of hesitate to say what my surname is for the obvious reason. I have no connection with Putin. I'm certainly not an oligarch, but just happens to be a position of my birth some time ago.
Yeah, and even then, I mean, what's brewed up with the what do you call it, media? I mean, who's to say who's right, who's wrong? Is it America actually that's the problem here? We won't go down that rabbit hole, certainly. But Dexter Moscow, Picasso, the sales presentation. Thank you so much for your time today.
Elaine, it's been a joy. I knew it was going to be interesting chatting to you. It's been fascinating, and I hope it has for others. So thank you very much for the opportunity of having this chat with you.
Most welcome.